With that, I'll introduce our presenters today. This morning we have Pete Robichaux and Mariana Dobre presenting. Pete Robichaux is a research engineer with the Forest Service at the Rocky Mountain Research Station in Moscow, Idaho. He has studied and modeled soil erosion as affected by wildfires for many years and is an international leader in post-fire hydrology effects and monitoring techniques. He leads various research teams and has developed several web-based models for us, including the erosion risk management tool, ERMIT, and also evaluates a lot of erosion mitigation treatments for us in the BEAR program. Pete is lucky enough to still be able to spend his summers chasing wildfires and playing in the dirt. Mariana Dobre is a research scientist at the University of Idaho, and she has been working on issues related to pre- and post-fire effects from forest management on runoff and erosion, forest nutrient management, and forest hydrology. She is a part of the team who has developed the WEPPcloud interface that you're going to be learning about today. And with that, I will turn this over to Pete and Mariana.
All right, well, good morning. This is Pete Robichaux. Mariana and I are located in Moscow, Idaho right now at the Forest Service facility, and we're sitting in the same room together, and we're quite excited to be presenting this webinar to you. I'm going to load up my slides here in just 1 second. There they are, and I'm going to go to a full screen. And everyone should be able to see the introduction page. Okay, so I'll get started. So here's my picture of your host, myself and Mariana. And we're very excited to be here to talk to you about the WEPPcloud. This is our newest interface that we've developed. We put a lot of effort into this interface. A lot of it was based on comments that we received from people like you in the field about wanting to model watersheds. And with that, I'm going to continue on here. Here we go. Just a reminder of the wildfire situation in the United States. Wildfires are still a major concern, and especially in the western part of the United States. And with the current trajectory in our climate, that is not going to change in the near future. As we all know, the newspaper gives a lot of effort, a lot of credit to the actual wildfires as they occur. But what's of interest now is in the post-fire environment. That is even getting a lot of ink in the national press, where they're starting to realize that the post-fire consequences can be just as concerning as the fire itself. Just looking at these headlines certainly indicates that. So with that, our efforts here with the Forest Service, we've been building interfaces to the WEPP model for a number of years. WEPP is the Water Erosion Prediction Project. And what we've done is targeted different interfaces to answer specific management questions, such as if you have a road erosion issue, we have an interface so you can look at road erosion and some mitigations on roads. If you want to do some other things, we have other interfaces to look at management. Let's say if you wanted to look at some fuel treatments, we have Disturb WEPP, and we also have Fume. Okay, and with that, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on our watershed interfaces that are kind of at the bottom of this screen, the WEPPcloud and the WEPPcloud PEP. That's going to be our focus today. But we did all of these interfaces based on some user feedback from you guys about the questions you're trying to answer. And as you'll see with this WEPPcloud interface, we've also done that. So let's just review a little bit about the WEPP model. When the WEPP model was developed, they did it in two modes. One was a hill slope modeling mode, and the other was a watershed modeling mode. The WEPP model was started in the late 80s and into the 90s to replace the universal soil loss equation for NRCS. And it was a large effort with the Agricultural Research Service, the Forest Service, and NRCS to develop new physical-based technology to be able to look at hill slope erosion as well as small watershed response. So with the hill slope modeling, a lot of you might be familiar with our interfaces that we currently have, DisturbWEPP and ERMIT. Within those two interfaces, the other thing that we built was batch processors. What we learned is that people aren't just interested in looking at the erosion off of a single hill slope, that they want to be able to do multiple hill slopes. The batch processor allows you to do all that, to put in multiple hill slopes, upload a spreadsheet to our server, run the model, and then have the answers come back to your spreadsheet. In the watershed modeling, we've done several things. We had a GeoWEPP version of the watershed model that you could use in the ARC environment. Recently, we switched over to what we call QWEPP, which is using the QGIS software. QGIS software is an open source software, and we switched over to that to be able to avoid getting into the different versions that the ARC people had done. Little interruption there. So with the QWEPP, that interface uses the QGIS software, open source software, and we can keep the version that it's using constant. So as we build our subroutines for that they will continue to work in that environment. With the ARC environment, what we found is that every time they update the version of ARC from 9.2, 9.3, 10.0, that our file structure didn't work again. So we decided to switch over to QWEPP. We'll probably have a webinar on using QWEPP at a later date for those of you who are interested in that. So the other component in the watershed modeling is WEPPcloud and WEPPcloud PEP. And what's good about these two environments is that we can, in the WEPPcloud, we can run that software and also get a CSV file that we can then import into DisturbWEPP batch.
It's a gallon per 1,000 gallons.
The other thing that we can do in the WEPPcloud.
Listen-only mode.
Okay, I guess that took care of all the noise we heard in the background. Thank you for doing that. So the WEPPcloud PEP, this interface allows us to also export a CSV file, which we then can import into the ERMIT batch processor.
Hi everyone, to deal with some of the issues with noise coming through, I am mute.
So the WEPPcloud interface allows us to look at erosion at the hill slope and the watershed scale. What we can use the WEPPcloud portion of the interface for is to look at undisturbed forest conditions and field treatment conditions. The outputs from the WEPPcloud can allow us to do a few things. We can output some maps. We can output maps to a GIS environment. We can also get a CSV file for DisturbWEPP. by doing all this, it allows us a lot of flexibility of using our existing tools with this new interface. With the WEPPcloud PEP, it's designed to provide erosion predictions after the fire, both at the hill slope and watershed scale. But one of the key things is the user has to upload a GeoTIFF file of the soil burn severity or a bark map, if that's what's available. And then the other things that we can do with this, we can look at erosion reduction by applying some mulch, by changing the cover, as well as providing the same GIS outputs and then an ERMIT batch CSV input file. So someone might ask, why did we go to the cloud instead of our other interfaces that we have? Well, what we found out is that when we were running WEPPcloud during the heavy use summertime, that we had some timeout issues of the server not being able to keep up with all the different requests. And then again, we also heard from so many people about the desire to have a good watershed interface to be able to look at small watersheds, the amount of sediment coming out of those watersheds, the amount of runoff, and the peak flows. So this was our attempt to meet those demands by making an easy-to-use interface, and hopefully you're all going to agree on that after you get done with the webinar today. And the outputs will allow you to create reports and GIS layers for public display or just for internal use. So today's webinar, we decided to go to Arizona. We're going to go to the 2011 Wallow Fire. That fire burned 500,000 acres, and some of you can remember that fire. I believe it was the largest fire in the state of Arizona. And we chose this watershed for this seminar today because on the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, there were some historic watersheds that the Forest Service had put in the 60s and 70s to look at water yield increases with timber harvest and different treatments. And these watersheds had some weirs. Well, immediately after the fire, we decided that this would be a great place to resurrect those weirs to monitor the post-fire flows and sediment yields. And that's what we did. So Mariana is going to be talking about that today. This next picture shows the weir in the top left right after the fire, and we installed our instrumentation, fixed the weir, cleaned out the sediment traps, and then over on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of the flow going through that weir during a storm in August 2011. This is about 2 months after the wildfire. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mariana, and she's going to walk us through all the steps needed to run WEPPcloud PEP. Okay, Mariana?
Thank you, Pete. I need to be able to control the screen. Kara, can you help me? Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Then we will proceed. So I can hear an echo, but it's okay. So my name is Mariana Dobre, and I'm a research scientist at University of Idaho, and I'm really excited to present this interface today. We've been working with a small group of people at University of Idaho and with Pete at the Forest Service. We've been working on this interface for a long time, and we really hope we created a product that will be very useful to you. A little bit about the interface, some advantages. It was developed specifically to help the Bayer teams with post-fire runoff and sediment yield predictions. So when we say that it's developed for the Bayer teams, we mean that all the files have been parameterized with field observations. And these are field observations that were made by Pete over many years, if not his entire career. So all the files, all the input files that go in the online interface are actually for post-fire conditions. The interface is online, and it only requires a computer with internet connection, so it can be accessed from anywhere. You don't need to have too many files or maps with you. You would only need a soil burn severity map that you can upload to the interface, and we'll show you later how to do that. We hope, like Pete said, we hope it is easy to use. We've worked a lot to make it very intuitive. And you won't need knowledge of GIS or hydrology. The interface uses freely available input data such as DEM, climate, soils, land cover, and also, like I mentioned, soil burn severity maps. Can be applied anywhere in the United States and can be modified to address future needs. And this is the way the interface is built. It allows us to add different features to the interface based on the needs of the users. One important thing is that we are not supporting Internet Explorer. So if you're accessing the interface from Internet Explorer, some of the features might not work. This is because Microsoft will discontinue the use of Internet Explorer and will replace it with Microsoft Edge. So if you're using Internet Explorer, be aware that it might not work. But the interface should work with Microsoft Edge, Chrome, Safari, and Mozilla Firefox. A little bit about the outline of what we will show today. We're going to talk just briefly about the interface. We will do a quick run and we'll do a post-fire simulation. Then we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue with a mulching simulation. So we will show how you can apply a treatment to an area. We'll do a pre-fire simulation. So basically, we're going to look at what the erosion was before the fire. And we're also going to show some additional interface options that we think would be useful to all of you. So what can this interface do? Some of you have worked with a previous version of the interface that we had in the past, and we also had a workshop on that interface. So you might know, but for those of you that don't know the interface, these are just a few things that we can do with it. So we can quickly delineate and run watersheds to predict post-fire runoff, peak flows, sediment yield, and these are from hill slopes, channels, and at the outlet of watersheds, which combines the hill slopes and the channels. And we can visualize results in tabular forms or graphic on the screen. So these are the main things that we can do with the interface and that we think you'll find useful. Obviously, we have more options, but we're not going to show all the results that we can get with the model. The model is quite powerful, and it has a lot of types of results that it can produce. Some of the useful things that we consider about the interface is that we can do these pre-fire and treatment runs that we can actually compare with the post-fire predictions. We have multiple climate options that we will talk about a bit later. We can view detailed hill slope characteristics like length and area and aspect. All the runs can be shared, and the results are all online. So basically, you would share a URL with your colleague, and they can see the watershed and the run that you created. You can quickly learn about the climate and the hydrology of a new area. So if you're assigned to an area that you haven't been before, even before you go to the field, you can already get an idea of the area that you're going to be working in. All the files are downloadable. You can import the results in ArcGIS, and that's another thing that we're briefly going to show to you later. And also we can export CSV files for ERMIT batch. And I know many of you are familiar with ERMIT, and Pete has done many workshops on ERMIT. And instead of typing all that information in ERMIT, you can import a CSV file directly from the interface. And again, we're going to show you this a bit later. The next slides, the next few slides are going to be about the interface, but then we will move on online to show you how you actually do a run. But before that, I want to show you how you can log in and register. So we have two buttons on the interface that you will be able to use. First, you create an account, and then you log in. The advantage of registering with the interface and logging in is that you can have your own user profile and store all the runs that you're going to create. So at any time, you can go in your account and view a watershed that you previously created. We also have these, what we call roles. So we have a regular user, a power user, which would be users that want more access to some extended features that we have on the interface. And then we have administrators or developers. The interface allows you to set a project name just to be easier for you to come back to a certain run. We also have the option to fork or duplicate a project, and this is one of the most useful things about the interface, as you will see a bit later, is that we can duplicate a run without having to recreate or re-input all the information about the watershed. And then we can simply change an input file, rerun the interface, and compare results. We also have an option here to download the project, meaning that you can download all the input and all the output files. Another useful thing is that if you're working on a project, you can make it public and read-only. Public doesn't mean that anybody can view this run. It means that if you share the URL with a person, they can actually view it, but it's not public on the interface. Nobody will see it because it's your run, but it's, by public we mean that it can be shared with other people. And if you don't want them to make changes to your run, then you make the project read-only. So yeah, like I mentioned, we have this runs folder that you can view, edit, or share previous runs. I mentioned that we also have the option to create power, to run the interface as a power user. We also have this power user panel. Not everybody will use this, but some of the more advanced users, or in time, once you become more accustomed to it, you can actually go to these WEPP runs and outputs that store all the input and output data from this interface. At this point, you might not be interested in this option. We also have this unitizer control that lets you set the global preferences for the units. Most of you here in the United States, you will use probably the English units, but we have several users that prefer the SI unit. So at any time while you're in the interface, you can switch between the two units. So the following slides now, we will move to the online interface to actually demonstrate some of the runs. And I created here a log sheet for this workshop where I have some parameters that I added here to this log sheet, but you don't need these parameters. I'll show you how you can run it without them. But you also don't need the link to the interface. You just need to remember the name, WEPPcloud. So we go to search for it, and we click on the link, and this is basically the main web page. You see the options that I showed you here at the top, log in and register. I will not register today, or I will not log in, because I have several other options in my account, and I don't want to confuse you. So I will run the interface today as a regular user. This top part here is called WEPPcloud, which is our main interface. This is not designed for post-fire erosion. We can run some simulations with it, but this is mainly using Sergo Statsgo soils, and it's a little different. Like I said, it's not parameterized with post-fire soil parameters. The one that we're going to look at today is called WEPPcloud. So that's the interface that you will want to use. We have some specific resources here, site-specific resources. You don't need to look at this one. And we also have a WEPPcloud utilities and a log. So that's all on the main page. You won't need most of these options. So let's start the WEPPcloud run. If you want, you can do your own run as we move through these presentations, but if you just want to listen, that's fine as well. So we click on Start WEPPcloud Run. And at this point, it opens this map, which is a type of a Google map. At the top here, you have an option to set your project name. So we're going to call this Wallow Fire Burn. And then we're going to click Set Name. And now this run will have a unique identification number here with this associated to this name, Wallow Fire. And on this interface, you can zoom in and move around, and probably this is easy for everybody to, it's intuitive, we believe. At the, below the map here, we have an option to upload a soil burn severity map. So we click Choose Map. We go to our files. Actually, I'll go on the desktop. Okay. We upload the map. And then we click the button, Upload Soil Burn Severity. An important thing here is that we don't allow people to upload shape files or images or PDF maps. And that is because it's very hard to work with them. So the type of maps that you can upload are TIFFs or GeoTIFFs or DNVR maps. So no shapefile. Okay, once we click the upload map, now we will see the soil burn severity overlapped to our Google map. And if we zoom out from this corner here, we can zoom in and zoom out. You can see that this fire is between Arizona and New Mexico. You can also double click on the map to zoom in again. Here at the bottom we have this summary for the map, and you'll see these classes: no burn, low severity, moderate severity, high severity, and no data. And most maps, this will be different based on how your TIF map was set up. In this case, we know that high severity fire has a value of 4. So we click 4 here and we say modify fire classes. And we see this query here that tells us that it was successful. So now we modified the classes. And you can also view them. So you can see, if you know that the pixels behind your map are 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can see to what soil burn severity classes were they assigned. So no burn, low severity, moderate, and high. And you see this tip here at the bottom, Press F8 to navigate back to the map. So this is very useful when if you are lost down in the interface at the bottom. If you want to view the map, you click F8 and it brings you to the top. So now you can see all the classes, the 4 classes of the soil burn severity map. The area that Pete was showing earlier, I know that is around this this location. But let's say if you don't know exactly the location and you have the coordinates, this is what I have here, an extent. And you can get this information from an old map. But the reason I'm using this is because I want to create the same runs that we provided in the worksheet. So if you want to follow the worksheets, you'll see that you'll get the same results. So a useful option here is to add the longitude, the latitude, and the zoom level of a map. So I'm going to paste this information here. It's delimited by commas, and we say go. And you see that now we have this extent, that this will always be the same as long as you provide the same coordinates. So we have the extent. Now, if we want to do this, next step would be to do a channel delineation. And what's important here, I'll go back to the top of the map. If we zoom out a little bit, if you go back to the channel delineation, it tells you that the area is too large. So you have to be in zoom greater than 11. This is an important thing. If you see that you cannot build a channel, it means that the area is too large. So you have to be in zoom greater than 11. So I will click F8 again to go to the top of the map. And I will go back to my zoom, and that's zoom 14. Okay. In the channel delineation, we have these 2 options: minimum channel length and critical source area. And you see these 2 values here, 100 meters and 10 hectares. What this means, the simplest way to explain it is that if you're running a large watershed, these 2 values should be larger. If you're running a small watershed, these 2 values should be smaller. So what it means is that we will start creating a channel once we have a minimum channel length of 100 meters and a critical source area of 10 hectares. So we need to have at least 10 hectares before the interface will delineate one hill slope. And we're using another software called Topaz to delineate this channel. So now we're going to change this 10 to 5 because our watershed is very small. So we click Build Channels, and every time you see this blue bar here on the interface, this is the one that tells you the status of the query. And once it's done, it's going to say Success. Okay, now we see a summary with an extent, a center, a UTM zone, and the coordinates of the upper left corner of the map. The only thing that you might need from here is this center. So that's the center of the map. Like I said, if you want to come back to this run to recreate it, and you don't have, you don't remember the location, you simply copy this information to a Word document or anywhere. And now you can see that it's similar to the values that I have used. So that's where I got my extent. Now we build the channels. Again, we click F8 to go to the top of, at the map. And now you see all these channels. If we were to use larger values for the critical source area and minimum channel length, these channels would not be so dense. You would probably see just a few lines. You won't see all these little channels. But again, because our watershed is small, we wanted to get all the channels. Okay. The next thing is to delineate an outlet. So an outlet is where are you interested in the runoff and the sediments. And for delineating the outlet, we have two options. Either use the cursor. So for example, we click here on the cursor, we go back to the map, and we click anywhere on this channel. And now you see this blue drop here that shows us where we are delineating the channel. The other option is to specify a longitude and a latitude. So if we click on this option, it gives us here a square where we can enter the information. And since I have it already, I will just copy the outlet. And then we say specify longitude and latitude. We go back to the map to view it, and now we see that the outlet moved from up here to down to this location. And this was me trying to guess where Pete had the weir installed, because we were trying to replicate Pete's runs. So now we have the outlet. The next thing to do is to delineate the subcatchments. Subcatchments is the same as hill slopes. So we build the subcatchments, and we get this information here that it was a success, and it's delineating the watershed, and we're getting this summary. And this is something that you might find useful, that we have 8 hill slopes, 3 channels, of a total area of 272 acres. So if you want, you can copy this information in your log file. And if we go back to the map, you now can see the delineated watersheds. And I will show you just a few options here after we delineate the land use and the soil. But for now, I can show you that on the right-hand side of the map here in the corner, we have an option to select or deselect if whatever we added to the map. And you'll see these subcatchment labels and channel labels. And these are important, these numbers are important because you can use them later to identify hill slopes that maybe generate more erosion. And these are, we call these numbers topaz IDs because they were delineated by this program that we call topaz. And the closer you are, like if you're running, for example, a larger watershed and you don't know where a specific hill slope is, if this topaz number is small, we are closer to the outlet. If the topaz number is larger, we're upstream from our location. But again, this is useful information, and it will come in hand later when you need to identify certain maps. Certain hill slopes. Okay, the next option here we have to delineate the land use, to determine the land use. And we have two options: to determine per hill slope or to use one single land use for the watershed. And if we click single land use for the watershed, we have this drop-down menu from where you can select different types of land use. We have the some general ones that are in the land cover database. We also have some site-specific land covers, and we also have some disturbed WEPP files. And these were developed by Pete and other people specifically for disturbed conditions. But we're not going to use these now. We're going to say determine per hill slope, and we're going to click build land use. And what it does now, we have those subcatchments, and we're going to overlap them to the soil burn severity map, and we're going to extract the most dominant land use within a specific hill slope. And from the soil burn severity map, we can tell now that we have about 54% of the area is unburned, 41% is high severity, and 5% is low severity. So this is one way to get an idea of the percentages. These are not going to be the exact percentages, but the dominant land use within certain hill slopes. So if we go back to the top here, we see this hill slope 43. We have behind them, so we can deselect the subcatchments and see what's behind them. This hill slope will be marked as unburned because the most dominant land cover here is unburned. But you can see also patches of red, yellow, and light green behind it. But just so you know how the interface splits these classes and how it assigns the land use option. Similarly, we have the soil options. So we have the option to determine per hill slope. We also have an option here to add an MUP soil. And if you're not familiar with this one, don't worry about it. It's the MUPs from the soil Turgo database. The other one is to use a single soil for the watershed. And just like with the land cover, you have an option drop-down menu from which you can select this soil. But again, we're going to use determine per hill slope, and we're going to click build soils. And now we're seeing again these three classes. So unburned, we're using a 20-year forest sandy loam that covers about 50% of the area. High severity sandy loam, low severity sandy loam. So now we have the soils. If we go back to the map, one useful option here is to go to the dominant land cover, click on this button, and view how the interface split or assign this soil burn severity per each hill slope. So we see that hill slopes 43 and 42 are no burn, and then the high severity fire is on hill slopes 23, 22, 32, and then hill slope 41 is a low severity fire. And you can also view the dominant soils similarly. And another cool thing here is that you can click on the slope aspect ratio and get more information about the slopes and the aspect. This wheel means that at the top we have north, bottom, south, west, east. So the purple hill slopes would be more southeast, and the green hill slopes would be more northeast. This is just to give you an idea of the aspect. And then the slope is represented by the intensity of the color. The more intense colors are closer to the center are less steep slopes, while the one further on the wheel are steeper slopes. And I'll click on the default just to show you another quick option here that is this magnifying glass. If we click on any of these hill slopes, we actually get information on the width, length, area, slope. This is a fraction, so you can convert it in a percentage, aspect, and then you see the dominant land use and dominant soil. You have to build the land use and the soils in order to use this option. If you don't have them built, they're not going to show here at the bottom. These are just useful things to consider. The next option here is the climate option. And we have either the option to choose the closest climate station, and we're using the Clygen model, which is a stochastic climate generator. So the data that is used is stochastically generated at a certain climate station across the United States. Each of these climate files are built for 100 years. So if you choose closest station, you get, for example, this alpine station that is in Arizona, and it looks like it's the closest to our watershed. We also have the option to do a multi-factor ranking. In this case, it's going to end up being the same station. But what this means is that it also considers the elevation, because a lot of times, or not always, the closest station is also the station that is more representative to our area. So we also have to consider the elevation. We might have a close station nearby, but it might be maybe on top of a mountain that is different, has different weather from the weather in the watershed. So we recommend this multi-factor ranking when selecting the climate station. In climate methods, we have what we call a vanilla Clygen, meaning that you're going to use the exact station or the exact weather data at that climate station. So it's not modified. We have these question marks to the right here, so if you hover over them, you can see actual climate station data, no spatial interpolation. So the data is used as is at that climate station. The one that we recommend is this Prism modified. This takes the data from the climate station, and it will adjust it with elevation based on the Prism data. So this is based on the monthly Prism data for precipitation and temperature. So it won't make a difference for our current run because the watershed is very small, but if you're running a larger watershed with big differences in elevation, you will also have big differences in the climate. So you would want to do a PRISM modified. We also have observed DayMet data. We only recommend running this option when you want to compare observed with predicted stream flow at a certain watershed. And that because when you're trying to predict stream flow, you want to have the correct precipitation and temperature at a certain date. This is the only time when you would want to use DayMet because it takes a long time to download the data and create the climate files. So you might not want to wait too much on this climate. We also have future climate here. This is experimental. We're still working on developing this one. And we also have the single storm option. So this means that you can create a run for one single event. And we give here an example of a value that you would enter. So month, day, year of the storm, storm amount, duration, peak intensity, and maximum intensity. For today, we're going to use this PRISM modified option. And you can also create one single climate for the watershed or multiple climates. In our case, it's not going to matter, like I said, because our watershed is small, but you can use it. Now, to build the CliGen file, we need to tell it for how many years do we want to build the climate. And we recommend at least 30 years, so you can get a whole range of weather data that you can look at. So we're going to say 30 years, and then we're going to click on the Build Climate. And now we're going to have these options, not options, but the status will tell us that the interface is building the climate. And this was fast. Like I said, if you are using the DayMet option, this would take a longer time, so that's why we don't necessarily recommend it. Now we have the summary of this station, so it tells us that it's alpine, the station ID, location, elevation, and we can also see the summary for the climate generated at the watershed centroid. Here you only have average values per month. We're also going to add another option for the year, just to be a little more helpful here. We're done with building the climate. We are now ready to run the WEPP model, but I want to show you this option here that is called Watershed Preparation Report. I'm going to open it in another tab. And what you can see here, remember that we had 8 hill slopes. So if you look at this WEPP ID here, you see 1 to 8. So these are our hill slopes. You can also see this topaz ID that I was telling you is important to identify some of the hill slopes. If you go back to the map, so you will see these topaz IDs. Then you will have a width, a length, area, slope, aspect, all this information for each individual hill slope. Then you can also see what is the dominant land use, the dominant soil, and the climate file that was used for the interface, or for that hill slope. Below we have the channels, and similarly we have topaz ID, WEPP ID, a channel number, an order of that channel, length of the channel, area, slope, aspect, and the same type of information. So we think this is very useful, especially if you have a larger watershed. This will be useful to come back to this preparation details and see all the details about these hill slopes. Now we go back to our tab, our main tab, and in the WEPP option here, you have some advanced options. We don't recommend you to do anything with these options they're mainly for advanced users if you have observed data from a watershed. But otherwise, you can just proceed with running the WEPP model, like I just did. And at this point, you're going to use the default value. Once you click Run WEPP, again, you can look at this status to see what the interface is doing. And it's telling you that it's running the hill slopes, here that it's calculating the channels, and then it tells you that was successful. And now we can actually see the results below here. So we have many results that you can look at, and these are the ones that you will want to consider after you submit the run. So you can see that the interface runs very fast, especially on smaller areas, and you can get results really quickly. It took us a bit longer because I had to explain what each option is, but otherwise it's very fast. So I'm going to show you just the results that specifically you will be interested in, or at least we think you will be interested in. So one is this watershed loss summary. I'm going to open it in a new tab. And here you'll see three types of results. The ones that are at the top here that I selected, these are all the results at the watershed outlet. The second set of results are these ones that are per each individual hill slope. So you see here the hill slope numbers. And the third set, these are all for the channels. And we're going to look at them now more in detail. At the outlet, it gives us a total contributing area to the outlet. So it tells us that we delineated a watershed of about 260 acres. The precipitation received by this watershed for the 30 years simulation that we ran, they're about 32 inches per year. The water discharge was 17 inches per year. The total hill slope soil loss was about 3,589 pounds per acre per year. And this might not mean too much because it's in pounds. The reason we have it in pounds is because if you run the interface on undisturbed conditions, these numbers will be very small. So to actually get numbers that are not 0.00, then we keep these numbers in pounds per acre per year. But this can be converted into tons. We divide by 2,000 to get tons per acre per year. We also have total channel soil loss. So we have about 10 tons per year here. And sediment discharge, 237 tons per year, or 1,825 pounds per acre per year. And like I said, these results here are a combination of hill slopes and channels, whatever gets to the outlet of that watershed. Now, you might be interested in just looking at the hill slopes, especially if you're considering doing a certain type of treatment. You might want to view the results per hill slope. And what we have here, I said this Topaz ID, WEPP ID. Then you have a land use and a soil. These are just codes. You don't need to consider them at this point. But then you get the length, hill slope area, the amount of a runoff, lateral flow, and base flow. So these are the three water balance components. So the runoff is whatever runs off on the surface of the soil. The lateral flow is the water that travels through the soil profile. And the base flow is the water that travels through the groundwater. And you can look at these three numbers will obviously be different depending on the size of the watershed. So on small watersheds, you might have small base flow. In larger watersheds, you might have more base flow. And the next three columns here, the soil loss, sediment deposition, and sediment yield, these will be the ones that you will probably want to look at more closely. Soil loss means all the sediment that is eroded and removed from the hill slope. This doesn't mean that all the sediment that is eroded will get to the outlet. It just means that the soil was detached. The next column is what we call sediment deposition. So once the soil has been detached, it can be transported, and actually it can be deposited before it reaches a channel. This is a small watershed, so we don't have any sediment deposition. But on larger watersheds, you might see a number here. So that means that part of the soil that was lost here, part of it will be deposited. And sediment yield is actually what gets delivered to a channel. And in this case, is the same number as the soil loss, because we don't have deposition. But just to make clear the difference between soil loss, sediment deposition, and sediment yield. Eventually, you will want to look at this sediment yield value. So this means how much sediment was delivered from a hill slope. Now, if we look at these values, we see that the higher number is 17,219 pounds per acre. So I was mentioning that we have these in pounds just because to be able to compare them with unburned conditions where these values would be very small. But we can convert them. Now, if we want to get more information about this hill slope, we say, okay, this is the hill slope that is generating most of my sediments. Which hill slope is this? Where is this located? And we go back to this topaz ID, and we see number 23. If we go back to our main run to the map, this is where we can visualize where this hill slope is located. So we see that is this hill slope that covers this high severity area. So in a way, it makes sense that this hill slope that is burned almost entirely would produce or would generate more sediment. So you see, this is one way in which you can toggle between the results that are in tabular form, but bring those results back to this visual delineation of the watershed so you can see where your erosion is greater. If we want to see the hill slopes that have the less amount of sediments, we can identify this hill slope 42. We go back to our map and we see that hill slope 42 is this one right here. We also see that it has a high severity area, but because most pixels are within unburned, then the watershed was considered this hill slope as unburned. And it doesn't generate a lot of sediment. Next, we can also look at the channels. You might not work with the channels that much, but it might be useful just to have this information as well. Again, we see a WEPP ID, WEPP channel ID, topaz ID, length. We see a channel area and a contributing channel area. This means all the area that contributes to this specific channel. We see discharge and sediment yield for a specific channel segment. And just like with the sediment yield from the hill slopes, These values, sediment yield, is what will come out of each channel. And usually the last channel, channel number 3 in this case, will carry all the sediments. So you will see that this number 237 here at the bottom is actually also at the top, 237, in the sediment discharge from the outlet. So this is the last channel, whatever is delivered from the last channel of the watershed. You also have this option here, channel erosion, because erosion can also happen in the channel. So it tells us here how much sediment was eroded from the channel itself. It doesn't mean that this is delivered. Again, just like with whatever comes from the hill slopes, this can be deposited within the channel, so it might not make it to the outlet. And we also have 2 other columns here, upland charge, so how much runoff is coming from upland, and then also subsurface flow. In this case, these values look like they're very small, but you could have values here. So I think at this point you get an idea of how you can look at the results and bring them or tie them with the map to visually get an idea of the sediments. If we go back to our main run here, we go to the bottom to the results section. We have another option which you will be interested in looking at, and this is called return period report. The return period analysis is based on the VBOL formula, and I'm pretty sure you know quite a lot about the return period analysis, but just briefly, you have a reoccurrence interval. So in this case, we have 2, 5, 10, and 20 years. And we are showing here precipitation depth for each of these 2, 5, 10, and 20 years. So this means, in this case, that 185, for example, inches of rain is expected to occur every 2 years within this watershed. Once every 5 years, you might get an event that would be 2 inches. Once every 10 years, you would get an event that would be 2.31 inches. And every 20 years, you would get a 2.56 inches. That's how you would interpret these tables. So this is the precipitation. We also have a table where we're showing the runoff. And similarly, you would get every 2 years, you would get an event that is 1.61 inches runoff. Every 5 years, 2.11. Every 20 years, 3.46. Just to give you an idea of the type of runoff that you might get. And you can also look at this month. The year and the day might not be that important, but this month might help you understand if we're looking at a snowmelt event or if we're looking at a different type of event. So when does this runoff occur most often? This is the peak discharge return period table, which again might interest you. So you see here the a peak discharge of 63 cubic feet per second that would occur almost every 2 years. And then the highest one would be 181 cubic feet per second once every 20 years. And if we look at a month, we see that this 63 cubic feet per second event might occur during the snowmelt season. So it would be a more common type of event, while these other events, the 98 cubic feet per second to 181, these events would happen mostly in the fall. So they might be related to the monsoon season, where there will be a lot of precipitation. So just by looking at these tables and when the events would occur, you can already get a better idea about the watershed and the area. The next return period is for a 10-minute peak rainfall intensity. So this is basically how much rainfall, what the rainfall intensity is for within a 10-minute period. And then you have a 30-minute peak rainfall intensity. Next, and the last table is the sediment yield. Okay, I wasn't sure if I got cut off. Can you still hear me? Okay, perfect. You can hear me. So the sediment yield, again, we have the reoccurrence interval, and we have the sediment yield in pounds again. So we have 241,000 pounds that would occur every 2 years. And if we want to see or calculate how many tons, we divide by 2,000, and it's about 120 tons that would occur every 2 years. Yeah. So these are the return period analysis reports and how you would interpret them, or how would you read them. The next one is the flood frequency report. We're not necessarily recommending you to look at this one. Some people, it's here because some users wanted it, and some of the users will look at it, but it's not that common. Most of our users that we know are looking at the return periods that I showed you previously. So again, if you see it, just know that it's something that some people might choose to look at. We also have another result here that we call sediment delivery report. And this will give you more information on the sediment. So you see the sediment particle class information that leaves the channel. And we are looking at this both at the outlet of the watershed and for the hill slopes, so from all the hill slopes combined. And what you see here, you might not care too much about the first table. This shows you the classes of sediments that WEPP divides all the sediments. So these are just sizes, particle size of the sediment. So you have percent sand, percent silt, percent clay, and percent organic matter. Another way to look at these that might be more useful is to look at the distribution of primary particles as fractions. So if you look at this table here, you'll see fraction of sand, so 36% would be sand that comes out of this watershed, 47% silt, and 15% clay. So that's how you would get an idea of percent fines or sand that comes out at the channel. The reason we are displaying all these results is because many of our users actually want to look at these particles that are leaving the channel, especially if you're considering an area next to a lake. And if you get a lot of clays or fine particles that might leave the channel into the lake, that might be problematic. So you might want to consider these values in that case. Here we have the results per hill slopes combined. So it means all the particle sizes that are coming from the hill slopes. So again, just like with the channels, we can see in this case that from the hill slopes, 65% of the sediment sand, 24% silt, and a very small percentage clay. You might also see this average annual sediment delivery from hill slope as 466 tons per year. And if you compare it to whatever comes at the outlet, this would be 237. So you might wonder why the difference. Like I mentioned earlier, not all the sediment that is eroded will make it to the outlet. So that's why you will get probably more sediment eroded from hill slopes, but they will not make it to the outlet. They will be deposited along the hill slopes themselves or along the channels. Now, what we have another option here for water balance reports. We're not going to show the first two water balance reports, mainly because we're still working on refining these ones and verifying them. And these might not be as useful to you at this point, especially if you're a new user. But we're going to look at this daily runoff, lateral flow, and base flow graph. So basically, we're going to look at the water balance components. And this will give you an idea of how the runoff, base flow, and lateral flow is distributed. And at the bottom, you have this bar that you can move left and right to basically zoom in to the area that you're interested in. Again, you see that this base flow, it's not noticeable. And that is because we're running a very small area and we don't have base flow on these little 8 hill slopes. This could be different in another area. Next, we have on the interface, and these are the last things. These are the export options. So you have a zip archive, just like this button at the top of the interface, this cloud with an arrow down where you can download all the files from the interface. You can use this button as well to download everything that that goes in this project, input and output. So you can use this one to download it. You might not be interested in this daily water balance report. This is for each individual hill slope. It's too much information. You might get confused at this point, so we're not recommending you to look at it. The really interesting one is this ArcMap resources. So this downloads a zip archive with all the geotiffs and all the shape files. And I actually have it open here. So once you download it, you'll get, this is the unique ID of your map, of your project. You unzip it, and when you open it, you see a set of files. So the first ones are all the channels, and the second ones are the subcatchments. And you also have all the maps that were used in this run in the geotiff folder. You see here some KML files. If you have Google Earth Pro, you can simply double-click on these files, and they will open now in Google Earth Pro. I already had it loaded, so I'm not going to reload it. I'll say yes. But once you click on it, you will be taken to this page and the location of that specific watershed. So I'm going to zoom in to the watershed. And if you click now on any of these hill slopes, you actually get information about this specific hill slope. So you can see that this was a high severity fire, and it's hill slope topaz ID 23. This one received about 318 millimeters of runoff on an average, has an area of 10 hectares, a length, the name of the project we ran. And if you look closely at the map, you can actually see that the hill slope to the left here was unburned, like WEPP selected it, and you can actually see that it has trees, while the hill slope above it, it's completely burnt, so the vegetation is gone. This map is from 2018, and the fire was in 2011. And I was zooming in earlier because when I delineated this file, I didn't know where Pete had his weir. But if we zoom in, we can actually see where the weir was. We can actually see the dead trees around it as well. But you see, this gives you a lot of information, or you can use the interface to visualize or to get some important files that you can use to visualize your area of interest. And the other option, like I said, you can open ArcGIS. Oh, sorry, not this one. This one. Okay. This is on my computer, so. We go back to this file, and we simply drag the shape files and the channels to our GIS. Let me close, okay. And now you can actually see our watershed that we delineated in the online interface. You can see it in our GIS. This is another way that you can share these runs with your colleagues. And now you can click on any of these hill slopes to actually get information such as the land use or the soil burn severity class, the type of soil that was used, the length, like all the information that we were talking about. And then you can actually display either the runoff or the sediment, whatever interests you. So let's say, in this case, we would want to look at the soil loss. So now you can see these red areas, they have more sediment. The blue areas, they have less sediment. And obviously from here, we're not going to demonstrate this one too much. But for those of you that know our GIS, you know now that how you can use it and how it can be useful. The other option, so this is just briefly before we're going to take a break, is this Hermit file that we can automatically create. So if you click on it, it will be saved in a CSV file. And if you open it now, it should open with all the information from the 8 hill slopes. So here we have the WEPP ID, we have the topaz ID, the soil type area, So all the information that is needed by ERMIT. And I'm sure there are some webinars somewhere that Pete did where you can find more information about it. But I think at this point we did this run, and we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we will revise just briefly some of these results, and then we're going to do a treated run where we apply mulching. We also do an unburned run, and we're also going to show you how you combine multiple watersheds if you're working on a larger area, and how you can view these results faster. And then we're going to finish with Pete showing you how these results compare to what he measures in the field, so you get confidence that the model is running properly. So we're going to take 10 minutes break. Yeah, 10 minutes break. So by 11:15, we'll start again the workshop.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. So one more reminder is the handouts are available to download if you haven't done that. The handouts are the worksheets that will walk you through all the steps that Mariana just described. It also has a PDF of these PowerPoints and has the screen captures of what Mariana just described. There's also a frequently asked questions sheet on the WEPP model. We decided to do that because we often answer the same questions over and over again about the WEPP model. So you might want to take a look at that during the break. And we'll see everybody at 11:15 Pacific time, and about 10 minutes from now. Okay? (11:15 Pacific time), and we're going to continue on with the webinar. Reminder that if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A section on your screen on the right-hand side, and you'll also have an opportunity to ask them directly, but we're going to hold all the questions to the end of the webinar. It's a little bit easier than to stop halfway through. So with that, Mariana is going to continue on with some of the other options that we have in the WEPPcloud PEP interface. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mariana, and we'll continue on.
Thank you, Pete. All right, so in the first section of the webinar, I hope you've got a brief idea of how easy it is to run the interface. Like I mentioned, the interface was developed by considering some of the inputs from some of you that have used the previous interface, and later we're going to show you how some of these comments that we received we implemented on the interface. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that the interface was developed for the BEAR teams, and we really hope that it's useful for you. If there's something that doesn't work, please write us and let us know, and we can fix it, and we can help you with some of the errors, if you see errors. Or if there is something that you might find useful for us to develop or to add to the interface that might help you when you develop your BEAR report, for example, please let us know, and we'll try to incorporate them. We're a small team, so it might not be very fast, but we definitely take into consideration all of your comments. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to look at treatment. So we've seen runs from a burned condition, and we saw the runoff and the sediments that are generated from this small watershed. And the next step is to look at treatments. And I was mentioning in the beginning that one important option here is this fork button. If we click the fork button, now you see that automatically the interface took us to this other tab where we're actually building the same watershed. We have to wait just a little bit for it to display. But at this point, we have a brand new run with all the input and the output files from the previous run. It's a little slow, so I'll give it a few seconds here. But if you look at the top of the web page here, you see two tabs. This is our first tab with a unique identifier, and the second tab has its own unique identifier. Just to give you an idea of how this other run was replicated from the first run. So now, what we're going to do, we're going to change the land cover. So after a fire, we actually cannot change topography, cannot change the soil. The soil is the same. So we're going to change the cover. That's what we want to do to reflect a treatment on this watershed. So now we're going to scroll down to the bottom where we have the land use options. And we're going to apply the treatment by changing the cover of the management files. So on the left here, we have a wrench. When we click on it, we have options for canopy cover, inter-reel ground cover, and reel ground cover. And we can see that the default values are 30 for inter-reel and reel cover. And we have the option here to change the cover, and we're going to consider that mulching is about 70% cover for both of these options. This is for the high severity. For low severity, we're starting at 80, so if we want to apply some mulching, we say we're increasing it to 90% cover. Once we make these changes, we don't have to change anything else, but we go down to the Run WEPP button, and we click it. And again, you're going to see the status here that the interface is running. And then it was successful. And below, we can see the run reports. And next, I'm going to toggle between this run and the previous run so you can see how you can compare the results. So now I'm going to go to the previous run, the one with the burn, and I'm going to open, let's see here, I'm going to open the watershed loss summary. I'll open it in a new tab. Okay, and here we saw that we got about 237 tons per year from this burned watershed, 466 tons per year hill slope, and 10 tons per year from the channels. And at the bottom here, we have all the results for the hill slopes. And we're going to focus on hill slope number 23 because this is the hill slope that generated most of the sediments as we saw previously. I'm going to move this tab next to the initial run that we did so I won't get confused. Now I will move to the new run that we did with the treatment, and I'm going to open this watershed loss summary. And now I'm looking at the watershed loss summary from the second run with the treatment. So we see the total hill slope soil loss is now 146, and the other one was 466. And the sediment discharge is 110 now. Before was 200 and something. And the total channel soil loss, now it's almost 7, and the other one was 10. So we're going to look at these other options too. You can see 466 hill slopes, 10 channel, and 237 sediment discharge from the outlet. So this would be sediment yield. If we look at the hill slope 23, we have 17,000 pounds per acre from this hill slope, and with a treatment, we have 5,655. So we can see by how much we actually reduced the erosion on this particular hill slope. And you see that some of the hill slopes are not changed. So you see this again, this 8 value here, that's because we did not alter. This is an unburned hill slope. So we're going to get the same results on the hill slope that we didn't change. So remember, the treatment we applied was only on the hill slopes that were high severity and low severity. Similarly, you can see what comes out from the channel outlet here at the bottom. So you see 110 sediment yield versus 237 that we had before. So again, this is a quick way for you to run this treatment simulation by duplicating a run and getting the results from that run. I forgot to mention that now we can change the name. We should change the name of this wall of fire and call it, let's say, mulch. And then we have to click the set name again. And next, let's look at the return period report from both runs. And we're interested, let's say, in the peak discharge and in the sediment. The 2-year return interval for the peak discharge was 63 cubic feet per second, and the 20-year return period was 181. Now, if we look at the mulch, the 2-year return period didn't change much. It's about the same, 62. But our 20-year return interval changed to, or dropped to 137. Next, if we're looking at the sediment yield, we go to the bottom of the page. The burned option had 2,041,000 pounds versus what we have now, 153. So again, you can see how it dropped by applying the mulch. we're not going to go too much into detail. You get the idea now how you can compare these runs. One thing that I didn't show is that whenever you see this sign to the right of the headings here, if you click on it, you can actually copy this table to clipboard, and then you can paste it into your document. So you might want to edit it after you import it, but you get the idea. Now you can also download these tables directly from the interface. The other thing that I want to show you is how to do a run. Let's see now. With unburned conditions. So we go back to the fork run, the fork button to duplicate the run. Okay, and now we go down to the land use option, and we click single land use for watershed because this was not burned. And we're going to select here from the disturbed WEPP files, we're going to select forest. This doesn't mean that the forest is disturbed. It means that disturbed WEPP is a set of management files that were developed for these types of runs. Then we click build land use. And now we see that we have only one management, which is this forest. For the unburned conditions, we also have to build the soils. So we are going to select a single soil for the watershed because they're not burned. So we're going to say we're choosing a forest silt loam. Build soils. And now we have one soil file for the entire interface. And we run the interface. We're going to wait a little bit for it to run. Success. And now, if we look at this watershed loss summary, we see that the hill slope soil loss decreased now to 0.2 tons per year, and the sediment discharge to 6 tons per year. You can see the difference. This is the burned run. We had 1,825 pounds per acre per year versus 48. And our hill slope 23 that generated most of the sediments initially, now it has only 12 pounds per acre. So again, this gives you a little bit of an idea of how you can use the interface to get to different types of results. I'm going to close these options now. The last thing I want to show you is how you combine. So a lot of users told us that once they, I'm sorry, before I continue, I forgot to show you actually how you can visualize the results on the map. So we looked only at the results in a tabular form, but we have this additional button here at the top, which looks like a pie. If you click on it, you have these options to visualize the hill slopes for runoff, lateral flow, and base flow. So let's say we click on the runoff, and you have this bar that you can move left and right to display the runoff, in this case in inches, that are greater than whatever the maximum value is on the bar here. So if you want to see the runoff above, let's say 11 inches or runoff above 13 inches, so you move this bar to help you visualize where you have most of the runoff. And same with soil deposition or soil loss. You have in the middle this 0 value. Whatever is to the left of this bar means deposition. Whatever is to the right of this bar means scouring or erosion. And similarly, if you move this bar, you're displaying now, for example, we're displaying all the sediments that are greater than 22,000 pounds per acre. Again, you can convert these in tons to make it easier to understand. But these are just for visualization purposes. For you to get an idea, if you have a larger watershed, where are the hill slopes that are going to cause most problems? So that's one way you can look at these. Yeah, so like I was mentioning, the last thing I want to show you is how you can use some of these runs and combine them to look at multiple watersheds at the same time. I mentioned that some of the users told us that this would be very useful for them. So we added, if we go back to the main interface, if you click on this WEPPcloud here, you can go back to, sorry, I don't know where, okay. You can go back to the main page. And at the bottom here, you have WEPPcloud Utilities. And if we click this button, it tells us that, oh, we can do a combined watershed view. And we have a title, optional, so we can say wallow, fire, combined. And here it asks us for the run IDs. And I mentioned that the run ID is in the URL. So you copy this run ID from the URL. You paste it here. And I already have two other runs that I'm going to take from the PowerPoint presentation. And all of these, you can see them at the end of the PowerPoint that we shared with you. So I have these other two runs here already prepared. Actually, I only want the ID. Okay, and then you have to separate them by comma. And then we click Generate URL. And you'll see below here a URL for the combined watershed viewer. If you click on this, it will take you to a larger map that will display all three watersheds. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And to the right of the map here, you can select or deselect some of these watersheds. So this one is the one that we looked at. And we also have the other two watersheds that I ran prior to this workshop. And to the left, you have the legend, and you have this tolerance value. Like I said, you can display sediments, only the sediments that are above a certain threshold, kind of like a T-value. So let's say 3,000 now. We click Set Tolerance. It didn't change much. We click 1,000. Let's see. Yeah. So you get the idea of how, let's see, 6,000. Then this is how you change how you display the results on this map. And then you can select the runoff now. And I'm going to change it to 4, let's say. And now you can see with light blue, for example, are the watersheds that generate more runoff. And dark blue, the watersheds that generate less runoff. And now you can take this URL that you just generated, so you simply copy it from here. And you can paste it in an email if you want, or it's a bit long because it has all the information in it. But you can share it with your colleagues. And similarly, if we go to the first run that we did and we copy this URL, this is something that you can share with a colleague. The only thing that you need to remember is that you have to make it public, and you have to click read only if you want people only to read the file and not change it. I think we're almost close to finishing. Another thing that just briefly I want to mention, the most common error we are getting with the interface is if you don't place this watershed when you delineate the channels, if you don't place the watershed within the extent of this view, you might get an error, and you can see this in the PowerPoint presentation I added. I'll go a little bit to the top here. This. So you get a watershed boundary touches edge error. This is the most common error that we see. So every time you see this, instead of blue, you see this orange box, it means that we have an error. So what you have to do is move your screen in a way that you capture the entire watershed within the view. So if you get this error, go back to the PowerPoint to see how you can fix it. And if you get other errors, just write us and we'll try to help you with them. And this is all we had to show to you today. Please let us know if this is useful to you, because it's actually important to us to know that, or if you want any changes that might benefit you as you develop your BEAR reports, because we really put a lot of effort in this, and we want you to use it. So don't think that this is for other people. This is for you. So if it's not useful, tell us how to improve it, and we'll take it from there. Now I'm going to pass it to Pete.
All right, thank you very much, Mariana. I'm going to now get control again and show you the last little section here. Okay, as that's loading up, Mariana just gave us a tutorial on how to run the WEPPcloud PEP. Hopefully everyone was able to follow that. Again, in the handout button, you can download the presentation, a worksheet, and frequently asked questions. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the results that she predicted with the WEPPcloud PEP, and I'm going to compare that to some of the results that we had measured at these weirs that I had mentioned that we installed after the Wallow fire. So, how well does the model predict? And this picture is right from the Wallow fire, so this is in that high severity portion that Mariana was talking about. Again, this is the watershed. On the bottom, up in the top right, you can see where the weir outlet is, and I'm going to talk about some of the results that we've measured at this site. This work I'm going to be presenting was from a graduate student who was working under Dr. Aaron Brooks and myself. His name was Dylan Quinn, and he was trying to run the WEPP model for these watersheds. But one of the things that he did, he kind of tweaked the model a little bit by using our observed rainfall that we had collected with our rain gauges. So this particular graph shows the storms that we had, 6 storms that we had in 2011 right after the fire. The fire was in May and June, and here we are in the beginning of August. We see our first storms that produced sediment. The white bar is what we observed, and the red bar was what was predicted by WEPP when we adjusted all the inputs to the actual rain that we collected there. And you can see that the model did very well. I converted those to tons per acre for you, observed 1.1 and then to 1.2 simulated. Mariana just talked to us about the WEPPcloud estimates that she just ran. We had about 1,825 pounds per acre, or 0.9 tons per acre in 2011, and that was running ClyGen in this same watershed. So right off the bat, you can see that we have very similar results, and that gives us confidence that this WEPPcloud interface is partitioning the sediment coming off of the hill slopes and getting to that outlet pretty well. The other thing that Dylan had compared was the peak flow estimates. This graph is showing you the observed peak flow on the x-axis and the WEPP predicted on the y-axis. This happens to be in millimeters per day. So the different lines you see, the red line, the bottom line is from 2011, next one up 2012, 2013, etc. So you get a feel for how the model is doing. A little bit under predicting of things, but really not that bad. If you look at this one particular triangle data point, this was a storm that occurred on the 10th of August in 2011. We were on site during that storm, and that's what the picture shows you. The peak flow is 81 millimeters per day, about 1 cubic meter per second. I-30 was 16 millimeters. Now, Mariana showed that in our WEPPcloud, in the return interval page, WEPPcloud PEP estimated a peak discharge of about 64 cubic feet per second, which is about 1.8 cubic meters per second, and that was for a 2-year return interval. If you take a look at that picture, you can see that we're just outside Bank Full, and so we feel that we're in the right ballpark even on our peak discharge measurements. I would expect what we observed and what we predicted here are certainly within the error estimate that we would expect the WEPP model to do. So these results are really promising for us, showing that at the watershed scale we are doing very well at capturing these post-fire conditions. For the hill slope results, I'm not going to present any of that today, but we've published an article on that a few years ago with all of our hill slope silt fence data and the ERMIT outputs, and again, we're very happy with those results as well. So let's just summarize what we did today, and then we'll have a few minutes for some questions. So our WEPP-based technology, it's a physical-based model. It reasonably predicts the runoff, the peak flow, and the sediment yields. We're pretty happy with these results. You know, a model is to really help managers and bear teams determine which areas are the highest risk and allow them to put some treatments on the ground, especially in the ERMIT batch interface, where you can look at different treatments, seeding, mulching, etc., and to see how that's going to change some of your results. This is our latest interface, and we hope that you find that useful for you. We included a lot of the suggestions that you people all gave to us over the last several years about what you wanted in that output. So as Mariana mentioned, if there's something else that you want, please let us know. I guess I want to say a special thanks to Bill Elliott, who many of you know was very instrumental in a lot of this work that we've done. He recently retired from the Forest Service. Luckily, we still see him around the office every now and then. And then Dr. Aaron Brooks from the University of Idaho and Dr. Roger Liu from the University of Idaho. They are key players in developing this interface that you see. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kara to help us sort through any questions you might have. But we certainly have enjoyed presenting this interface to you folks, and happy to take any comments or questions that people have.
Okay, during the presentation, we had a couple of questions come in through the question and answer pod. The first of those was, since the model uses the most predominant burn severity for each hill slope, can it be assumed that it is underestimating the watershed response?
Kara, could you repeat that question one more time, please?
Since the model uses the most predominant burn severity for each hill slope, can it be assumed that it underestimates the response?
Well, it may not always underestimate. Again, it's doing the dominant. So as in this example we saw, part of that one hill slope showed it as unburned, even though there was some high and moderate burned in that area. I've physically been out there and I know that. So it will vary on different runs how it will respond to that.
I also want to add that we have another option on the interface, which is called the flow path analysis, that instead of running each hill slope individually and assigning dominant land use and soil to a whole hill slope, it runs pixel by pixel. So we call this a flow path analysis. I didn't show it today because it takes longer time. Imagine if we have all these 30-meter pixels and the model has to run on each of them, especially if you go to a larger watershed, then it can take a lot of time. So usually what we recommend is to first run the interface in hill slope mode to get an idea, a rough idea of where your sediments are coming from, where you get most of the runoff from, and then maybe create a smaller watershed only in that area and run the flow path analysis. This you'll find this option in the advanced options right above the button where you click to run WEPP. Like I said, this was just an introduction to the interface, so we didn't want to go too much into detail. But we can run flow path analysis, and the users can do that too. The option is there. I just didn't show it.
Thank you, guys. The second question is, in the frequency analysis, what does the day and year associated with each storm imply?
We mentioned that this is a stochastic climate. So it's created based on observed data, but it's basically a stochastic climate. So the day, month, and year are the values come from that weather data that was generated stochastically. So it doesn't mean that that particular storm happened in year 3 exactly, but it means that typically in September we might get those types of storms. So in the climate input file, we do have days and months and years, all of them with specific rainfall intensities that are specific for that month. So the day itself might not mean a lot, but the month might mean something, because that gives you an idea if you're in a snowmelt event or if you're in the monsoon time of the year. So it can help you understand a little more about that part.
Perfect. Thanks, Mariana. Yes. One more question so far that's come in through the question and answer pod, and that is, are there soil files for all of National Forest Service system lands in the model?
I can speak about it a little bit, but for the general WEPPcloud interface, we are actually using the Sergo database to create a soil file from the Sergo database. So we create an input file that has all the information required by the model, like hydraulic conductivity, soil depth, percent sand, silt, clay, percent organic matter, and so on. But on the Bayer interface or on the WEPP interface, obviously we couldn't get all this information to know specifically what will be the hydraulic conductivity of a specific soil in the United States. But what we do have, we created this database based on Pete's data from many, many years of research in this burned watershed, where he measured the real erodibility, inter-real erodibility, what's the hydraulic conductivity, and all these parameters. So we created kind of like specific soil files for a sandy loam soil. Just to give you an example, so we have the soil type, and for each soil type we have an unburned condition, high severity fire, moderate, and low severity. So this is how we represent the fire's severities within the soil profile. So this is based on observed data for major soil types.
Next question is, where is the real computation conducted?
So we have the model on in cloud, and once we prepare all the input files, then the files are translated into the model and then run online. So I'm not sure if I really understand the question. But real and interreal, they are basically used in equations within the model itself.
The follow-up to that is there a cloud computing service used or a HPC?
It's hosted by the Northwest Knowledge Network.
So I'll just clarify that. Here in Idaho, at the University of Idaho, we're associated with the Northwest Knowledge Network, and we're kind of going through that portal to get to the cloud to do this computing. So University of Idaho, key player in what we're doing right here.
Perfect. Thanks, Pete. Next question, we'll probably have time for 2 more questions after this, but can you enter and run the model for a specific storm of choice, or are you limited to the default climate data?
We have 2 options. So one option is to, if you mentioned specific storm, so I'm not sure if you mean a specific storm or a specific weather climate, but if you mean a design storm, then if you go to the interface and you click on the specific storm, then you can change those default values to a storm of your choice. If you have climate data at a weather station and you want to use that weather station, we don't allow that yet on the interface, but definitely it can be run. If you download all the input files from the WEPP model, then you can run it outside of the interface if you want your a specific climate or weather file. But yes, you can change the specific storm design, yes.
I'm going to see if I get this question right. So if a person is interested in just a certain part of the watershed, can they control that with the location of the outlet?
Yes, I think I understand the question. That, like, if they're just interested in a smaller, let's say a sub-watershed out of a larger one, yes, they can change that outlet location just to that sub-watershed and run that.
I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. Oh, there is one more. So in a lot of our national forest systems lands, we don't have SERGO data. how does that impact the availability of soil data in the model?
Okay, so I want to clarify that for the WEPPcloud interface, we are not necessarily using Surgo data. We are using the files that Pete developed over the years from observed data at some of these fires. The Surgo data that we use is on the general interface, and it's true that Surgo doesn't cover the entire United States, which is why for the areas that Surgo data is missing, we are using the StatsGo database to get those soil characteristics.
So maybe I'll just clarify that. So the soil files in either the StatsGo or Surgo do not have post-fire soil conditions in their database. And for us to run the WEPPcloud PEP interface, we need to have burnt soils. So we have developed the database based off of the measurements that we've made here for post-fire conditions, for the high severity, low severity, etc. So when you are running the WEPPcloud PEP interface after a fire, you're using soil files that we have made based on our observations.
Okay, I have one final question, and it goes back to the outlet again. So if you don't have a specific outlet already identified that covers your watershed, how easy is it to locate that outlet to cover your area of concern?
If you don't know where the outlet is, I would recommend just to zoom in, maybe deselect the soil burn severity map so you can see the Google map that is behind, and try to orient yourself based on specific map information. So maybe there is a town nearby or a tall mountain or a lake, just to get an idea of where you're located, and then manually put the soil burn severity map back, try to delineate some channels and try to guess it. Another option is if you have GPS coordinates, so if you go to the fields and you are in an area and you kind of know where you are, you have the GPS coordinates, then you can use those coordinates to plug them in the bar at the top of the map, like I showed you that you have that option where you enter the longitude first, then the latitude, and then you give a zoom number. But you can use GPS coordinates from that area. You can even find those online for specific areas.
Okay, and here is the last question, and then we'll wrap up. Can the user define the spatial resolution for the model, for example, using coarser resolution over a larger basin?
Currently, we have a 30-meter DEM that we're using. We also have a 10-meter DEM experimental interface, but we're not working with that one yet. We're still trying to figure it out. But in terms of spatial resolution of the watershed itself, we recommend changing those minimum channel lengths and critical source area to try to create more or less hill slopes or coarser hill slopes. If you go to a larger basin, then you will have too many hill slopes to handle. So at that point, you might want to make them smaller. The only caveat is that you should never have more than 1,000 hill slopes, because WEPP cannot handle more than 1,000 hill slopes. So you should build watersheds that are not too large.
I think I'll just add to that, just to clarify. We get this question quite often: what's the largest watershed that we can run? And with this interface here, you know, you run something up to maybe 10,000 acres, we should be okay. I certainly wouldn't go any bigger than that. But one of the limitations is that WEPP updates all of its files on a daily basis. So if I have runoff in a large watershed that's not showing up to the outlet for greater than a 12 or 24-hour period, then it's not going to carry that over to the next day correctly. Some of these questions that are coming up, if you look at your handout on the frequently asked questions, we've addressed a bunch of these. So if you read through that, that might also give you some other tips and stuff about the WEPP model and the interfaces that we just presented. So with that, I think we're going to be all done. Thank you all from our perspective, Mariana and I, on listening in to this WEPPcloud PEP presentation. It certainly has been our pleasure to share the work that's been going on here for a number of years to get to a watershed interface that we feel that users should be able to use. And hopefully you all have a good fire season this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete and Mariana.